Question 41 of the Bushiroad survey. What are your views on a platform for players to keep track of matches they played in their local game store? If you answered anything but A, I'm afraid you're wrong. Hello folks, today we're going to be talking about the value and importance of a ranking system or this kind of platform for players to keep track of matches in Vanguard. And so this is taking from the Bushiroad survey that they held over the month of February, and they asked for two things essentially that, kind of piqued my interest. One of which was, this whole platform for keeping track of your, it says matches, but really it sounds like a ranking system, what it means. But they also talked about a small entry fee for better prizes in a different question, which I'm not going to cover in this video. I think a lot of us know what that means. I'd be very happy to pay a small entry fee just to get booster boxes and stuff for top 8 or top 16, which would be very nice. So that's something to talk about. But today we're going to be focusing purely on player ranking. So how the structure of this video is going to be, we're going to talk about how it already exists in Italian Vanguard. So Italian Vanguard already has player IDs and a player ranking system that they follow throughout all of their tournaments. Then we're going to examine how player ranking systems function in the top, the big three basically, Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And then we're going to talk about how could a ranking system be implemented into Vanguard in the current state of the game. And so hopefully we're going to have some nice ideas. I have my own ideas that I'm going to talk to you about, but I want to hear your ideas in the comments as well of what you think would be an effective way for a player ranking system in Vanguard. So we travel down to Italia di molto, and so we're going to be taking a look at the way that the Italian ranking system works. So I got this from Thomas Turola, who is, the guy that sent me the Daikaiser trial deck and just in general kind of my Italian Vanguard contact. He's a really great guy. And so I asked him to tell me more about the ranking system for Vanguard in Italia. And so he broke it down for me, and the general kind of rundown is that you receive points for every single tournament you participate, but there is a multiplier present depending on the level of tournament. So if you're participating in a locals or something of that equivalent, like a sneak peek, etc., you get a ×5 point multiplier. So, I don't know how the point breakdown works in terms of how many points you get for entering or how many points you get for winning, matches, and then how many points you get for winning the entire tournament, but it's a multiplier 5. A store qualifier, which I'm assuming is the same level as our shop challenges, nets you a ×10 multiplier. Then a festival, I'm not sure what festivals are, but I'm assuming it's kind of like regionals, but maybe big city based. Those net you a multiplier of ×20, and the nationals, aka the biggest event that Italian Vanguard has, net you a multiplier of ×40. So that's really big, and that's an interesting system because you earn points as you go, but you have a multiplier depending on which events you're participating in. And he told me these are multipliers, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were also just the amounts of points potentially you get. Maybe you get 5 points just for entering a locals, and this is you get 40 points for entering a nationals, but then you get them ×40 depending on how many points you amass throughout that tournament. So I didn't ask him about that, but that's the information I know. But one of the problems that he talked about is that the issue is that there's no real physical reward. The rewards that they get for being highly ranked is that you get essentially custom skins for your player ID cards. So it's kind of exclusive skins, just bragging rights on your player ID, which I think is pretty cool because that way you can kind of show off with it, and you maybe have seasonal skins depending on, which season you top in or which year you top in. I think that's pretty cool actually, but he said that no real prize equals not much motivation for people to, go down to a locals or to keep competing non-stop just to keep amassing points when there's not you don't get boxes, you don't get exclusive promos or stuff like that. You just get this kind of aesthetic addition to your player ID. So I think it's already a good start, but apparently he told me that there's potentially more rewards coming soon, to motivate players to utilize this system and to keep amassing points throughout the year. And so player ID systems as on the basis have the advantage that you can always kind of keep track of your progress. You can keep looking at break down your matches, look at what you faced and how you did in each tournament, and kind of look at your weak points and analyze yourself as a player. And it's also good for people like me who analyze these players and look at these players and see okay, this and this player was doing really well in this format, but then when this set released, they kind of dipped, or something like that. So I think that's quite interesting and a good starting point for those kind of point systems. And so that's why I think the Italian system is a start, but it's obviously not as fleshed out as the big three are internationally. So now let's go into the big three. We're going to start off with my favorite, basically my favorite competitive card game system in the world, which is Pokemon TCG. So Pokemon TCG has this thing called championship points, and the championship points you use to qualify for Worlds. There's always a cutoff point for these points, and it depends on your region, depends on your age group, and it depends on those kind of factors. But you gather those points by entering all kinds of events throughout the year, whether it's locals, regionals, nationals, internationals, special events, and stuff like that. And then by amassing those points, you receive your Worlds invite. But it goes deeper than that. So now I'm going to pop up the table for the 2019 Pokemon TCG World Championship qualifications. And so here you see rating zones on the left, broken down by each region. So US and Canada, Europe, Latin America, Oceania, and South Africa. So we can see that it's also broken down by age group. So if you're not familiar with Pokemon TCG, Junior is basically up to, I think, up to like age 12 or so. Senior is up to age 16, I want to say, and the Masters is everything after that. If I'm not mistaken, it might be 18, but like it's kind of like broken down in terms of age groups to keep it fair. But Masters is usually the one you want to be looking at because that's the most representative of the general player base that competes in these big tournaments, you know, every single week, and they travel and they pay big money to build good decks and stuff like that. So it's usually going to be the Masters that we're looking at. So if we look at, for example, US and Canada, they need 550 points. Every single resident of US and Canada needs to gather 550 points in order to qualify for Worlds. So that's mainly because they have a lot more events and a lot more tournaments, and that way they can go to more events to gather more points on a shorter basis of time compared to somewhere like Europe, where in Europe you only need 350. But the thing is that this is another topic for another video, which I am working on, is that in Pokemon TCG, you can participate in any country you like, which is a super healthy thing for a competitive card game because people want to travel. So you'll see like international events will be open to everyone. So you'll see like people from, you know, Asia, Europe, America, like South Africa, Brazil, like from South America as a continent, you know, from everywhere, all over the place. You'll have people competing and they're all trying to get those points because they want to qualify for Worlds. And so here's like the general breakdown of the point system, but then they also break down like the way that the qualification works, because once you hit this threshold, like let's say 350 for Europe, you're invited to day one of Worlds, but you're not being paid for like your travel or anything like that. You don't get any like sponsorship to get there, basically. So you have to, you know, work that out yourself. But there are things called day two invitations that are also based on points. And now, the Day 2 invitations are also divided by rating zones. And so, I'll just show you right now, it's like the top 16 players from the US and Canada, then the top 22 from Europe, the top 8 from Latin America, and top 8 from Oceania. And then Korea and Japan is like on its own. It's separate, but it's still part of Worlds, just like they follow a different system, which actually isn't as good as the international system. So you get these 54 players that don't go to day 1, they watch everybody else play out day 1, and they just sit and relax and play test until day 2. And then day 2 is like the top cut basically already, where the day 2 winners, essentially the best players from day 2, will go on to the final day, which is the actual finals. So that is very interesting to me because you have a lot of people at Worlds. You have hundreds of people at Worlds because a lot of people manage to qualify for day 1 via the point system, but then the super competitive people that travel to every big event, that build the best decks, that playtest the most, that really dedicate themselves to competitive play, they end up being that top 54. So they end up getting the day 2 invites, and they're always competing with the ranking system, and you can always check the rankings of the players online, which is really nice. So that's a really cool system in my opinion, because you don't have the same system as we have in Vanguard where like you win a regional and you qualify, you know, which is arguably maybe easier because you only need to focus on one competitive format and then you can just like sleep for a few months and then wait until you play just for Worlds, right? Whereas in Pokemon you have to really be competing all the time. You have to be building the best decks all the time, have to have the best strategies all the time, and always have to be traveling for big events and to make sure that you qualify, and not just qualify but actually make it to day 2. Now this is also broken down in terms of the levels of events, just like in the Italian Vanguard system. So for example, you get like small amount of points from locals, and then you get more points for entering a regional, you get even more points for entering an international. They're not national, they're internationals, but they also have national events too. But each of those levels goes up in terms of points, how many they give you, which is how it should be. But you also have this thing that Magic also employs called a best finish limit. And for example, on a local level, you can only have 2 best finish limits. So for example, if winning locals gives you 15 points, you can only do that twice. And then from then on, you'll just have to like go to bigger events to get more points, because this prevents people abusing that system, because then people can just keep going to locals, to small locals over and over and over and over again, keep farming points by just winning the locals every single week, and then qualify for worlds just like that. And a lot of people actually abuse that system on one of the years where this best finish limit wasn't a thing, and then just qualify for worlds through winning locals, and then obviously scrubbed out at worlds, you know, because that's just how it is. Like, it's not possible to do that kind of thing. But it's interesting because this, and then there's a best finish limit for every mode. Like for regionals, you get 8 best finish limits. For internationals, you get 4. And so you can go to these, like that amount of events and keep trying to top, and then keep farming points to actually qualify. And it's really cool because when you look at Pokemon TCG players on like Twitter, for example, they usually have like, even in their descriptions, they'll write like how many points out of how many they need to qualify for Worlds, and like if they're already in or if they're not, or and like then you'll see the players that are really competing for the best. Like they'll need to hit 350, but they already have like 700 or something. Like they already qualified, but they're really going for that day 2 spot because they're so competitive and they want to just make sure that they get in for the best chance at Worlds and play on the best playing field and manage to win the whole event at the same time. Okay, so that's enough for Pokemon. This video is going to get too long if I keep going on about that. So now we're going to quickly go over Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s point system is pretty new, if I am correct about that, because I'm pretty sure before it was just YCSs and the like national champions of championships of each like continents, like Europe and the US and stuff like that, that would give you the qualification for Worlds. So it's kind of more similar to the Vanguard system before, I think. But now they employed a point system as well, as of recent, if I'm not mistaken. So essentially they have regionals, and if you win a regional, you go to the World Championship qualifier European Championship, because this year Worlds is going to be in Europe for Yu-Gi-Oh! So you go to the European Championship, and then the regional, national, and continental level events all award you points. So you don't get points from local events, so unlike Pokemon, you don't get anything from that, but you know, it's still something that's worth to note. But then the top ranking players in terms of points are invited to a special 8-man playoff the day before the European Championship. And then the top 3 of that 8-man event will go straight to the World Championship. So it's kind of interesting because this point system takes the top 8 players, puts them in one tournament, and takes the top 3, sends them straight to Worlds, while everybody else has to play in the European Championship and then qualify through that. So it's kind of interesting because you can qualify via the path, if I'm not mistaken, you go regionals, then European Championship, then Worlds, or you go points, then the playoff, and then Worlds. So it's kind of like 2 divergent paths, but they lead to the same thing, aka Worlds. And I think that's pretty interesting because that kind of combines what we have in Vanguard with a point system. So you have the qualifications via regionals, plus the qualifications via points, and then, you know, flying out 8 people to the same event isn't that difficult, I think. You know, you just have to make sure that, like, you have a cutoff period for those points pretty early to make sure that you can, you know, safely get the flights and all the like travel expenses covered for those players, and then you just take them straight to the European Championship, and then they can go to Worlds. So it's an interesting format, and I think that is very similar to Vanguard's, and that could be adapted pretty well as well. Then Magic is kind of my unknown territory, so I had to outsource a lot of this information and ask people, like people in my locals, Soul and Vanguard, and people like that, because I don't know much about Magic, but I did find, I'm going to leave links to where I found this information in the description if you want to check it, so I have one for Magic too. So for Magic, you have events such as the GP, the Pro Tour, the World Magic Cup, and the World Championship that all award points. And then apparently the best 6 finishes in the Grand Prix, so the GPs, award you the most points, if I'm not mistaken. And then you also have something called the Player of the Year in each region, which is the #1 player. They just get this kind of like title, which is pretty cool because that in itself is bragging rights, and you probably get some prizes on top of that, but I don't know that one, so don't, if it's wrong, don't hold me against it. I don't know too much about Magic. And then after all of those like points are awarded, and you know the players have a ranking in terms of their points, the invitations to Worlds are actually based on the pro points that they gather. So it's kind of similar as in Pokemon, but it's a bit of a different system because I think they also have other ways to qualify too, but that's just like, that just shows my knowledge of Magic. But they do have an interesting kind of ranking system as well. So now I'm gonna go over my potential ideas for a ranking system in Vanguard. I think the multiplier system in Italy is interesting, but it can be abused a little bit because like participating in 8 locals equals participating in a regional, and that's pretty easy to do because that's 2 months worth of locals compared to one big event that maybe you can't even travel to. So it's a little bit abusable, I think. So that's kind of might be an issue. I think the Pokemon multiplier or like point distribution is actually arguably the best. I think the top ranked players of each region should be invited to Worlds. I think that would be healthy. Maybe you can lower the amount of qualifications via regionals, you know, in the net general circuit, or you just do the same thing where you pay for the first place and let the second and third come on their own, and then you cover, like, let's say the top 4, or maybe like top 2 of each region, you know, like top 2 of each region in the rankings get sponsored invites to the finals, or maybe even the first place. You know, it doesn't have to be that many people, but it would give a lot of incentive to people to compete and kind of like race for the points. It would also be nice because then the team leagues, which a lot of competitive players kind of skip out on or don't take as seriously because they're more fun-based events that don't lead to anything, could also give points, and that way those would contribute to your Worlds qualification later in the year. But if they don't want to do a Worlds invite, I think what they could do at the very least is like have seasons, like let's say 3 months or 6 months at a time, where the rankings reset, and then based on the top, let's say like 10 players, they get something similar like judge promos. Like judge promos are given to judges who judge in events, so, and they're just like full art hot stamp versions of originally existing good cards, usually perfect cards. So they could do something like that for the ranking system too. So for example, the top 5 or 10 best ranked players in a certain region receive promos, which is pretty simple to do on Bushiroad side because they just need to remove the borders of a card, you know, of like some popular card, or they just give it kind of like the World Finals treatment and make it foil, which would also be super nice because that way you give a lot of incentive to people to compete, and even though they're still competing in the system of regionals to get to Worlds, they would still be competing for the points to get those cool promos and try to get a playset and stuff like that, and I think that would be actually a pretty interesting format as well. But then, you know, looking at the big 3, it's pretty obvious why they have these ranking systems in place, because they work so well, and leading up to World Finals is a good system. You know, it shows that in all the big 3 it works well and the players are happy with it because they want to compete more and more and more. But there's one issue that I'm going to cover in another video, and it's kind of going to be like a rant PSA kind of video, but the issue that we as Vanguard players cannot compete in other continents, except for Japan for some reason, because it's not part of our kind of system. So like when I was living in Japan, even as a tourist, I could compete in a WGP or a big event actually, because like it's just fine. Like you're allowed to enter those events, but for some reason in English Vanguard we're not allowed to, and we're like, me as a European, I can't compete in an American event, Australian event, Asian event. Like, it's weird, and I don't think that should be in place. And I also wonder why it's in place to begin with, because every other card, like Magic is okay, Yu-Gi-Oh is okay, Pokemon is okay. If you want to be part of the big 3, I think you should probably follow their pattern, because people want to travel. People like traveling for big events and meeting people from all over the world outside of just the World Finals. So I'm not going to go too far into that. That's a separate video for, you know, a different week. I'm definitely going to go over that because that's something I feel very strongly about and I think it should be abolished. But anyway, that is it for this video. So what do you think of the ranking systems that I went over, and what do you think would be the best kind of ranking system or just like player tracking system for Vanguard itself? So do let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm going to be in the comments as well, you know, replying to as many of you as possible, so let's get some discussions going. On that note, that's going to be it for me today. Don't forget to check out the different things in the description, hit those bell buttons, etc. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.